Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. We are going to give it another minute or two to make sure that we start promptly at 6:30 and to allow for other guests to join. So we will be back on in about 2 minutes. Okay, so to honor everyone's time in an effort to start promptly, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight. This is always an extraordinarily busy time of year, so we appreciate your presence. I understand that for many of us, many people, other things are going on. So this webinar will be recorded and posted to our website, likely Friday or Monday. Additionally, the PowerPoint that we present tonight will be emailed to every family. So what you see tonight are many live or not so live links, but they are links. Once you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to access those. So that will be emailed to you tomorrow or Friday. So again, thank you for joining us. We think we have some really helpful information tonight to give you to really frame what's up and coming for your juniors over the next few months. So by way of introductions, my name is Heather McVeigh. I am the director of the guidance department. I'm pleased tonight to have a few of the counselors with us. We have Miss Jody Walsh, Mr. David Soulard, Miss Leanne Soulard, and Miss Joanna Kaplan with us tonight. So thank you all for being here to present. Our goal tonight is, again, to present a really broad overview of what you and your student can be doing over the next few months. We acknowledge that this can be an extraordinarily stressful time, particularly for those families going through this for the first time. So we wanted to give you some information to really kind of debrief and think about over the next few months, understanding that we are here to support you every step of the way. And we will be reiterating this information with students starting in January. And we'll get to kind of the process behind the scenes of what we do with the students later on tonight. But this is really just information for you as parents so that you understand what our conversations will look like, that you're getting the same information so you can start having those conversations at home. So the 4 topics we will cover tonight, one is a timeline of what should you and when should you be doing things. We'll talk some about standardized testing and how that's changed over the last few years as it relates to college admission. We will talk about opportunities for college visits, how to search for colleges, what to ask for, what to look for, so on and so forth. And then we'll end the evening by talking through Naviance and what that can offer you and your student as you begin to explore and research colleges. I did want to make mention that, like I mentioned, this is a stressful time. We do acknowledge that some families do reach out and engage enlist the help of a private college counselor. And while that's entirely up to you as a family to make, we just want to make sure you are informed and making sure that you know how to research and identify people who truly are in the business as professionals. And these two links, which again you will receive through email, really highlight certified licensed private college counselors who have had rigorous training and who have had ongoing professional development in the field. So while we acknowledge that this is a route some families will take, we just really want to make sure that you're well informed when choosing who you might work with. So that will be available to you when I share the PowerPoint. And to kick off the night, I'd like to introduce Jody Walsh. She will walk us all through the timeline for our juniors.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. So I'm going to start by covering a timeline that we hope will be helpful to you and your student as they begin to consider some post-secondary planning. Just to start with a little background. So historically, approximately 85% of our graduating class will go on to a four-year college, 3% to a two-year or trade school, and roughly 7% into work or military. So while the majority of the information shared tonight is focused on the college search process, we do want you to know that we are certainly committed to helping all of our students reach their goals, whatever they may be. So to start, if you're not really sure where to start with your student, this information may be helpful to help you guide a conversation with your student. Self-reflection, talking about even PSAT results, career research, utilizing supports can be all very helpful in the career planning process. Self-reflection can be super challenging and anxiety provoking for our students. It's a time in their life when they're really starting to make some pretty big decisions. So if you could use all of your patience, your guidance, and your understanding, that will certainly go a long way at this time. We found that parents often have better luck communicating with their student during a scheduled conversation. So if you want to let your student perhaps pick a time where you and your family can sit down to discuss their interests and what might be good fits for you and for them, maybe make them their favorite meal or favorite snack. During the week might be super busy with activities and jobs and so forth. So maybe during a weekend, maybe, before or after a football game. If you're Patriots fans, probably have better luck if you're having that meeting before the game, because there aren't too many happy households at the end of the Pats game. Car ride may also be a great time to try to grab their attention. If you're headed someplace that might take a little bit longer, you may need to pry that cell phone out of their hand first. You can also simply start with, hey, I heard that PSAT results have been released. Did you check College Board? If you get that blank stare, you might want to ask them if they created a College Board account yet, because that's how they'll need to access those scores. I won't talk too much about testing. I know Mr. Soulard's going to be talking about that in a minute, but just a reminder that those PSATs are merely a practice for the SAT, just to see what that test is like. But it's also a great tool to use to recognize where a student's strengths and weaknesses are so that they can better prepare for the SAT or the ACT if they'll be taking those in the future. Certainly utilizing support team can be very helpful. You have had a wealth of experience in careers and jobs. Talk about your college experience and how you navigated that process. We are certainly here to support them, as well as coaches, employers, family, friends. Everybody always has a word of advice. So if you can just be mindful in, again, using that patience and guidance and understanding in the process. I put Google Classroom up here just as a reminder that we've started using Google Classroom for each grade level. And we try to post as much information as we can, just as a way to get information out to our students. And we do really post quite a bit for our juniors and seniors, just because there's so much that we need to share with them. So if you could kind of give them a gentle reminder to check their emails, that would be helpful. Moving into the fall and winter, and students can start to use some career search engines to explore careers and interests if they're not really sure what direction they want to go in, or even if they are sure what direction they want to go in, just to get a sense of what that career entails. And sometimes there's a related career that might spark even a bigger interest than the career they initially thought they were interested in. So Naviance is a career and college readiness platform that we use in guidance. Last year in our sophomore seminars, we met with the students and had them take a career interest profiler. And this is a 60-question inventory, and the results are linked to 6 personality traits. And then those personality traits are linked to careers. And then there's a wealth of information related to careers in there. So if your student has a chance to revisit their summary and they can look through the results, we can reset and they have the option to retake that. If they were not in the seminar, they can certainly take that. And I know Ms. Kaplan's going to be talking a little bit later about how to navigate Naviance. The Mass Hire and the ONET are both career search engines that can be very useful in the process as well. You can simply type in a specific career like an accountant, for example, and you will get a variety of information related to an accountant, such as the salary, and you can do the salary by state, the job growth outlook, which could be a really important component, what that might look like in the future. The skills needed for the job, the types of tasks you may be doing day to day. So a lot of you, and of course the education required. So a lot of useful information. And the Mass Hire actually also has, it's called a reality check, where students can figure out how much money they need to live a certain lifestyle. So with today's cost of living, that certainly could be very beneficial. Continuing in the winter months, so beginning in January and running through March, we'll meet with our juniors one-to-one. And the purpose of that meeting is to discuss goals and career planning. We will show them how to complete a college search if it's a college-bound student. And we will help them organize an outline for the spring and summer activities, as well as including a testing plan with the dates for upcoming SAT and/or ACT. So students will need to create accounts to register for these tests. As I mentioned earlier, the College Board is aligned with the SAT, and then they would just need to create ACT account as well in order to register for those tests. And that's done at home. And following the individual meetings with us, we'll put together an initial list of schools for them to research, and that's based on the information that they shared with us during that meeting. It might be where they, based on where they want to go to school, perhaps the size of school they're looking at, and other criteria such as those factors, as well as schools that would be good fits GPA wise. And I know we're going to talk more about a variety of terms in a few moments. Continuing in the winter and spring, more research visit preparing, so students can attend college fairs, visit colleges, and continue to build that list of potential colleges they may be interested in. In February, we will meet with our seniors to have them select courses for next year. I find that it's pretty early to be meeting with them, but it's necessary in order to just prepare the Aspen schedule and program. I feel like some of our students can be a little over ambitious at that time and tend to select a really rigorous schedule. And then when we get into May and June and July, all of a sudden they're realizing that they may have been a little over ambitious and now they're looking to change classes. At that time, some of that can be a challenge because a class that they may want to go into is full, and then they can't get their second or third choice. So if you could just urge them at home to be really thoughtful with this process, although it seems really far away, it's not always easy to make changes down the road. And certainly we want them to have a schedule that's at least as rigorous as this year's, if not a little more rigorous. In late spring, following April vacation, we asked students to reach out to their teachers for letters of recommendation. The majority of colleges require either 0 or 1 academic letter of recommendation. Some of the more competitive colleges will require 2. So we really ask students to stick to those standards. With over 400 students in the class, this is a really large demand on our teachers to write a lot of letters, which they do voluntarily. So we'd really like our students to be mindful of that process. They can also ask for an outside letter of recommendation from a boss, a coach, or a clergy, and that certainly adds an additional letter to the mix, which that person will know them in a different perspective than the teacher would. Any students considering playing Division I or Division II athletics must be registered through the NCAA Eligibility Center. So the link is here, and as Ms. McVeigh mentioned, that will be a live link. Oops, sorry, if I don't move enough, my lights go out. Oh my goodness. So those students will need to register through the Eligibility Center, create an account, go on and register. There is a fee. I believe it was $90. I tried to look at it, but I couldn't get far enough in the registration process to verify that cost. Once they have registered, we will then send their transcript to the NCAA, and then the NCAA will confirm with the college that that student is now eligible to play Division I or Division II athletics. For any student considering Division III, they do not need to go through this process. They are good to go. And moving on to summer opportunities. Franklin offers both a Common App boot camp as well as a college essay writing boot camp in July and August. The Common App is one type of application that's used by over 900 colleges. So once students fill out the bulk of that application will filter into each of the other college applications that are part of the Common App schools. We run that boot camp in August because the Common App rolls over each year to show the appropriate deadlines for schools in the coming year. So we wait until it rolls over so that students are working on the most current Common App and the one that will be relative to their year of graduation. We do offer the college essay writing boot camp in July if you're interested in that, and you would register through the Lifelong Learning Institute. I did check the website this week, and it says, please check back at the end of January for registration. So in early February, you should be able to register for those. These are great opportunities to kind of take advantage of the summer months and get a jump. The essay can tend to be a big stressor for our seniors. So coming into senior year, having at least a rough draft can really help quell the stress level and is advantage of having one step completed. The Common App is certainly something the student can do on their own, but again, just coming in and having our one of our guidance counselors walk them through the process can be much less stressful. And certainly if they don't do anything in the summer, we are here to support them when they come back in late August. Volunteering, internships, job shadows are all great opportunities to gain exposure, gain experience. Internships can be hard to come by for our students of this age, but there certainly are a few out there. This is where networking and using your friends and family may be helpful, even to have your son or daughter talk to somebody in a career field just to gain a little bit of knowledge about a particular career. And lastly, there are an ever-growing, ever-increasing number of pre-college summer programs out there. I was talking with another counselor earlier, and we're just starting to get emails now about their reminders. There's actually some early bird discounts to register early to save some money. So these colleges these pre-college programs are a great opportunity to see what it's like to live on a college campus, to attend a college class. Some of these classes may be tied into specific majors. They can be really costly. Like I said, they do offer some early bird discounts. They do have very early registration deadlines, as early as the middle of January. So if this is something you're considering, you may want to just Google pre-college summer programs and you'll probably get an endless list of information. While it's a great opportunity for your student to go and, visit a school, live on campus for a little bit and see what it's like, it it's a nice resume builder, but it's not something that's going to make or break their application. And wrapping up, I'd just like to add that this is very much an individual process. Students will be in different phases throughout the year. They do actually tend to stress each other out with saying where they are in the process. And then if the student isn't in the same spot as their friend, they feel like they're now behind and they can become very anxious. So again, just gentle reminders, good communication with them. It's important just to keep making progress. And I will now turn it over to Mr. Soulard, and he's going to be sharing some information regarding testing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Walsh. And welcome again to everybody. Please grab your number 2 pencils and get your desks in neat rows as we begin to talk about some standardized testing. And for those of you who just got a pit in your stomach, I certainly understand. And your students are fortunate that they may not be in a situation where they in fact need to deal with standardized testing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here over the next 10 or so minutes. So, if we were to flash backward to the pandemic, I think that people sort of have identified that as a time when test optional really came into vogue. But the reality is that even prior to COVID disruptions, many schools were sampling the idea of being test optional. And the best way at this point to identify the school policies from one college to the next would be to use the link again here on this slide at fairtest.org. That is a clearinghouse where they collect information of schools' test policies. At last check, it was at about 1,900, close to 2,000 plus colleges are either test optional or test blind. And just to make sure that we're understanding the terminology there, test optional, it is what it sounds like. It is an option for the student to choose whether or not to submit standardized test scores or not. Colleges that have adopted a test optional policy, though, have indicated and made a commitment that students will not be disadvantaged by not submitting scores. So in these cases, it would be students who feel as though their test scores are a particular advantage to them. They've scored high as it relates to other applicants to that particular school, and they may choose to submit a test score. Test blind, on the other hand, is a school that would indicate no matter what a student's score is, no matter whether they choose to share it with that college or not, those test scores will not be considered in the admissions process at all for any student. Certainly, test optional is far more common. Test blind is a policy held by probably around 100 schools or so in the country, whereas test optional is, again, nearly 1,900 plus schools that have adopted that policy. While the fairtest.org website is the best clearinghouse, we would still encourage each student and each family to check the college's individual websites. Policies do change from year to year, and in some cases, there are particular programs or other reasons why a student may need to take a standardized test and submit it to a school. So again, each college's website is your best resource. If we were to think back to perhaps when we were applying to college, those many years ago, we probably were receiving in the mail an information booklet with a paper application. And as part of that application, there were directions, perhaps many pages of directions that we would scour and read through to make sure that we were meeting all the necessary requirements. Well, no longer are those view books being sent out with applications and printed directions. As Ms. Walsh mentioned, that common application is really the application that is used by the vast majority of schools. And while there are some rudimentary directions that are there and the application is rather self-explanatory, there are some unique policies and unique requirements, particularly for those students who might be applying to a performance-based program like a music or an art program or things of that nature where they might need to submit a portfolio. So again, that won't all be part of that common app website. Students should get familiar with visiting college websites and using that as their primary source of information for application requirements. Lastly, just as a footnote, again, Ms. Walsh mentioned that NCAA clearinghouse component. Prior to last year, whether a student's set of schools were test optional or not, if they were planning on participating or playing Division I or II sports, they needed to go through that eligibility center, and standardized tests were required. That is no longer. The NCAA clearinghouse no longer requires test scores for eligibility. So as we continue to think through whether or not standardized tests are something that makes sense for your student, rest assured that athletes considering Division I and II do not need to consider taking the test for that purpose alone. So as we move further on, start to consider what are some of the considerations that you might have in whether or not a student should take or plan to take standardized testing. As I mentioned earlier, there are some schools that may be test optional that may still have a particular major that requires the student to submit test scores, or may have a particular scholarship program that may require a student to submit test scores. Bear in mind that they are few and far between. The vast majority of colleges that have gone test optional also have all majors test optional, and all students are considered equally for scholarships, regardless of whether they submit test scores or not. But again, there are some nuances there that we would encourage you to and the student to research. As it relates to majors in particular, we're thinking about things like healthcare, some nursing majors, potentially some combined programs where a student is applying now for a bachelor's combined master's or a bachelor's direct PhD program. Some of those may have requirements of standardized testing. So again, those college websites are your source for that definitive information. Some other things to think about. If a student chooses not to submit their test scores, it does increase the value or focus on the other factors. So if we were to think about or envision a pie or a pie chart, a standard application may have 5 pieces, and typically they're 5 equal pieces. A student's academic record, their activities, their essay, letters of recommendation that are written on their behalf, and then their test scores. Well, it stands to reason if we were to take out their test scores, that's one piece of pie that is no longer there, and the 4 remaining pieces get relatively larger. And in fact, the academic record probably gets larger disproportionately. So it's just another thing to think about. Does a student's academic record, their transcript, their grades from year to year, does that stand on its own? Or perhaps might standardized test scores serve to bolster their application? So in that way, it may be a reason to consider, in fact, taking some standardized testing. The other things to consider, those middle 50% of the admitted scores at the colleges a student might be interested in. So again, take College X, they will publish, in most cases, what the middle 50% of admitted students scored on their standardized tests. So they may say that standardized test takers at our school scored between an 1150 and a 1400. And it could be a wide range like that. Well, as you can imagine, with students only having the option or being given the option to submit test scores over the past few years, that middle 50% of scores has gradually crept up because only the strongest test takers and test performers, I should say, or test scorers, are choosing to submit their scores. So when we say take a look at it skeptically, certainly it would be a factor in whether or not it makes sense to submit scores, but just because a middle 50% of a school's test score range might seem higher than your student has performed, that does not mean that they are unable to gain admission to that school. It may mean that they shouldn't plan to submit their test scores, but it may not be a definitive piece of information to determine whether or not to apply or not. That being said, if a student were to take a practice test and their scores are well below that middle 50% of published scores, it's probably wise to either plan to improve or plan not to take those tests, or certainly at least not to submit those tests. And we'll talk a bit more about how to improve or steps that can be taken to improve as we move forward through the presentation. Having talked a little bit about some of the considerations, I'm going to drop a really busy slide on you. And trust me when I say I'm not going to go through this item by item, but we wanted to be able to give you a side-by-side comparison of the two tests really at play, the SAT and the ACT. I can say that historically, the two tests used to be quite dissimilar. And in fact, the same student taking both tests might have scored quite differently. Then through the late 90s and into the 2000s, the tests grew sort of in line with each other. And more often, students were scoring quite similarly on the two tests. Now we're at a stage where we really just don't know what the comparison will be in terms of student performance. We can see the comparison between the tests here in front of us, but when it comes down to student performance, we're at a real crossroads of unknown. And the reason for that is on the left-hand side, as we look, the SAT format has changed from what the ACT format is and from what the SAT format had historically been for all years prior to this. So unfortunately, your students are the first to be taking this web-based adaptive test. It is similar in ways to the web-based PSAT that they might have taken earlier this year, but that wasn't an adaptive test in the way that this SAT will be. So what do we mean by a web-based adaptive test? As you can see, there are still 4 sections, 2 reading and 2 math. But the way that this is going to work is that they're going to take their first reading section, and it will be the same as all students nationwide. But then they will take a second reading and writing section, and it will be different based upon their performance on the first section. How will it be different? In what ways will it be different? That's more of a College Board detailed algorithm sort of question that I'm not in a position to be able to answer for you. But I can tell you that it will be different and it will present a bit of an unknown. Unknown in terms of how it will impact scoring, unknown in terms of how much each question might be valued or weighted as a student takes that test. It really is a new and somewhat uncharted water for the SAT. These types of tests have existed for higher level tests like the GRE and GMAT previously, but this is the first time it's coming down to the SAT. So we're really in a place of unknown. Other things to just note, the SAT obviously is a bit shorter by a few minutes, and the scoring is different. The SAT still will be scored out of 1600, whereas the ACT is scored out of 36. Important to note, the SAT scoring is done by adding their reading writing score out of 800 to their math score out of 800. And in that way, their reading, writing, and math are both equally weighted. Over on the ACT side, you see that there are 4 sections still, English, math, reading, and science, though, in this case, and their overall composite score is made up by averaging those 4 scores. I mention this simply to say that for stronger math students, sometimes the SAT may prove to be a benefit because that math score is 50% of their overall score, whereas with the ACT, their math score is really just 25% of their overall score. Something to consider. As you look further down, you'll see some of the other differences between the 2 different tests. Important to note, while the grammar section on the SAT indicates that it's about 71 seconds per question, the ACT is 36 seconds per question. Keep in mind that the grammar section on the SAT is really part of the overall English based reading and writing section. So trying to come up with averages is really difficult to do. It's difficult to do a true apples to apples comparison, but we wanted to use some averages here just so that you could start to get a sense of one test versus the other and amount of time a student might have on questions on one test versus the other. There are some things about the SAT that make it a bit more challenging. Certainly on the reading comprehension section, the vocabulary is more intense. It's more vocabulary based, and the passages are a bit more challenging. The ACT is a bit more direct in the questions they're asking and not quite as intricate with the vocabulary they're expecting students to know. Similarly, on the SAT, math questions are often multi-stepped and are requiring students to be a bit more inferential, whereas on the ACT, math questions are, again, a bit more direct, maybe only requiring 1 or 2 steps and a bit more clear in what they're asking a student to do. The last difference I want to point out here is that the SAT does not have a science section, while the ACT does have a named science section. And I think that this can sometimes confuse students, and often they think that, well, if I'm planning on applying to a school as a science major or an engineering major, perhaps I should take the ACT. That's the test for me. Well, the reality is that that science section on the ACT isn't so much how much biology and chemistry they remember, but more chart reading, graph interpretation, data analysis, and those types of questions are present on the SAT. They're just encapsulated in the reading, writing, and math sections. So similar skills are being pulled upon as it relates to those science-based questions, if you will. So now that I've hopefully not bored anyone to tears with flashbacks to their own testing performance or testing experience, let's really get down to which test is best for your student. In the end, really, you've got to try them both. Again, I'll date myself here and ask us to remember back in maybe it was late 80s or early 90s, there was the Pepsi challenge, right? And if we remember it, people would walk up to a booth and they'd ask them which soda they preferred, Coke or Pepsi. And in this ad, people preferred Coke, and then they had a blind taste test and turned out that they liked Pepsi better. Well, in that very same way, we are a Coca-Cola environment here in the Northeast, or at least at Franklin High School. If you talk standardized testing with students, they think that the SAT might be the only thing out there for them and say that they prefer that. Well, they just don't know until they've tried the ACT, and in fact, tried both. Those students that took the PSAT earlier in the year, they had to dip their toe into those waters. But we would strongly encourage students at this point, go online. There are paper and pencil ACT tests that they can download from the ACT website. They have a scoring guide and an answer key. And within a few hours, over the series of a couple of days even, they can chunk it out. We've got a December vacation coming up. I'm sure there's nothing they'd like more than to spend 3 or so hours taking a practice ACT, but you can tell them that I said it was a good idea. But quite honestly, that way they could then have an ACT score unofficially that they could compare to their PSAT, or if they didn't get to take the PSAT, they could take a practice SAT. Now, if they haven't taken the PSAT and they are planning on taking a practice SAT, my strong encouragement would be to take that on paper. And there are 4 digital practice SATs that they can access. So again, we want them to take these tests in the format that they will be taking them when it comes time to take it for real, and then compare one to the other. If they do take both and are looking to compare them, a simple Google of SAT, ACT, compare, and you're going to come up with what is a 2018 concordance table, or it compares an SAT score to an ACT score, and in that way they can see which one they scored better on, or if they scored equally well, perhaps they just identify that they have a preference for one versus the other. That preference may come down to whether they enjoy working on a computer or prefer the traditional paper and pencil. That's certainly something to consider. As I mentioned earlier, those stronger math students may prefer the SAT because it has a higher weight, if you will, to their overall score, whereas the ACT is a bit heavier in needing students to be efficient with their reading. For some students, the newness of the SAT may make them uncomfortable, and in that way, they'd prefer the regularity and the tradition of the paper and pencil ACT that has been longstanding. One thing that does not matter, though, at all, is what region the colleges are in that they plan to apply to. And I bring this up simply because historically, the ACT was identified as more of a Midwest and perhaps a Southern test, whereas the SAT was more of a coastal test. That is no longer the case. Colleges use that concordance table quite readily. They're familiar with both the SAT and the ACT, so it really doesn't matter. This is about finding which test your student is going to perform better on. Another thing to think about, though, is the math readiness in terms of when to take the test. And in just a moment, we're going to switch slides here, but I will just mention that both tests are really expecting students to be proficient with content through Algebra 2. So if you've got a student who's currently in maybe geometry or Algebra 2, they're probably best served to wait until later this year before taking the test so that they have the math background that they needed. If you're working with a student who has maybe they're in pre-calculus or further, they certainly are ready to take either test and could do so at their most convenient opportunity. And I mentioned convenient opportunity because there may be some test date conflicts that you may need to consider when looking at test dates on this next slide. Those test dates, again, we've got both SAT and ACT here for you, with a star next to the March and June SAT dates. We here at Franklin High School are a test center for those dates, but we are not for the May date, and we are not a test center for the ACT. I will say that we endeavored to be an ACT test site for a number of years with no luck. They have a particular set of expectations and requirements that we did not meet for them. But I will also say that over the past few years, they have been decreasing the number of test sites because fewer and fewer students are in fact taking these standardized tests because of the test optional and test blind policies. So we are a test center for the SAT. Does not mean we prefer or favor it, just means that that's the one test that we are a center for. We aren't a test center for May because that is typically the day after prom, and we find that not so many of our juniors are dying to dance the night away and then wake up early and give their best test performance. So we are a test center for the other dates. You'll note the registration deadlines there. The one other thing I just want to mention as it comes to planning when to take these tests, flashing forward a bit to next year and some application deadlines, many students are thinking about applying in the November timeframe of their senior year. And in that way, having testing done by October gives them the best opportunity to decide whether or not to include their testing as part of their application or not. Certainly November and December can be viable opportunities for some students in some circumstances, but planning to test no later than October is probably in the best interest of those students who are looking to submit applications at the earlier end of the application timeline in November. And then second to last here, very briefly, I'll just mention that here we provided the links to the registration opportunities, both College Board for the SAT and ACT student for the ACT with prices here. The one thing just to mention here on this slide is that students do register at home. This isn't something that they are typically coming in and getting help with. It's not particularly difficult to do, but they should plan to register early in order to get a seat in the test center of their first choice or on a test date of their first choice. I mentioned fees. These tests do cost a bit of money each time they are taken, but fee waivers are available for students that are eligible. That eligibility typically is students who might be eligible for the federal free or reduced lunch program. Now, finally, my last slide before I hand it over to Ms. Joanna Kaplan here in just a moment. But we just want to talk briefly about some opportunities for test prep, right? So maybe a student has taken the PSAT and hasn't scored as well as they might wish, or they know that their scores will need to improve in order to make the dream school more of a reality. A few different opportunities here, some of them free and some of them taking a little bit more time and money. Certainly practice tests, as I mentioned, are available on the individual websites. Khan Academy, if a student did take the PSAT, their score can be linked to Khan Academy, and they are then provided additional targeted SAT prep based on their pattern of rights and wrongs on the PSAT. So that can be a good additional reason why they woke up early that Saturday back in October. Some self-study with guidebooks. They can sign up for a question of the day to be texted or emailed to them. Flashcards in terms of working on individual vocabulary terms or math concepts. In terms of increased investment, both of time and money, test prep courses, those are still in existence. And if your student is someone who is not likely to independently and individually work on their own and need a bit more guidance or a bit more instruction, then those test prep courses are certainly something to consider, though they can range anywhere from a few hundred to $1,000 or more dollars. And then if that is not going to get them where they are hoping to be, certainly private one-on-one tutoring is another option, but again, certainly quite costly. And then lastly, YouTube, yes, quite seriously, YouTube is a resource. There are a wide variety of tutorials and videos that are available both for SAT prep as well as for content prep as it relates to some of the math concepts. So with that out of the way, I do believe that, let's see, I apologize. I think I'm going to be handing it over to Ms. Soulard for the next step. Thank you.
That is correct. Thank you. It's a lot of information to take in. So we're going to transfer, I guess, or transition rather, to the college search part of things, sort of the overview of that, and then we'll move into Naviance with the how to do that. So we always like to start this conversation with students by asking them, why they want to go to college. We do that because, like Jody said at the beginning of her part of the presentation, asking a student why really encourages that self-reflective piece. And believe it or not, every once in a while we get surprised. I might ask a student, so why do you want to go to college? And they say, I really do not know. That's what I'm supposed to do, right? And our college going rate is really high here. And so chances are, that student's probably going to go on to college. But just make them stop and think for a second, because I think that students can kind of be on autopilot through high school. They just kind of sail from year to year and they kind of get onto the path and aren't all that encouraged to kind of take a moment to ask themselves why they're doing certain things. So you might just want to ask your student that question, why is it that you'd like to go to college? Another question is, am I ready to invest this much of my time and probably somebody else's money into what a college education is going to demand of me at this time? Not all students are ready to leave home, especially I think in the last couple of years, I've really been surprised myself about the number of students who kind of want to stay close to home or maybe choosing to start at a 2-year college because they feel like they still have some growing to do. And this process, like Jody said, it really is individual and it's fluid, and students might even change their mind a couple of times as they go through it. So these are just a couple of easy questions to ask as you get that conversation started. Another big question is asking students, what is it they hope to take away by going to college? Some students who have a really high career orientation, who maybe view college as a time in their life where they go to prepare to become a something, they might enjoy going to a school and might find it really valuable where they can have co-ops, multiple co-ops, or maybe multiple internships. Whereas somebody who hasn't quite discovered or figured out what the world needs them to be yet, might need more guidance from an advisor, helping them discover a meaningful career path. And it's okay not to know. It's okay for students to not know what they want to do. They're 17 years old. And we've been talking to sophomores these past couple of weeks, and we talked to your sophomores last year at this time too. And they'll have multiple careers and jobs as they go through things. So it's okay for them to not know right now. Or maybe students would like to go to law school or medical school or veterinary school or something beyond that. And, maybe they really need a strong pre-professional advising program or a particular set of courses that's going to help them get there. So sort of just trying to flesh that out a little bit as you go along. And another question to ask, and I ask students this all the time: can you achieve your goals without going to college? Our economy is changing quickly, and not all viable career paths require a college degree at this point. There are lots of options. Students who maybe won't attend college right after high school still have academic and life and personal goals. Somebody who wants to be a contractor or a plumber and electrician still needs to pursue education, maybe just not in a college path. Certain health careers don't require a four-year degree. IT careers, one of the things that I've been talking with students about is programs like Grow with Google, where you can get multiple credentials and be really skilled and go to the top of the giant heap that is the application for a Google job. And life and personal goals, you can have financial security and a good work-life balance without necessarily going to college. So these are all questions and things that we're talking about with students when they come into our office. And so we just share this with you so that you know what we are talking to them about. So I'll go on to the next slide here. Ideal fit. I think this is probably like at the heart of this part of the presentation for me. Some students have already started creating their college list. It could be that they've had a dream school in mind for, many years. We've been talking to them about this for a couple of years through our seminar classes, talking about how to combine their career interests with, possible college matches. There are definitely points for them to consider, like the type of learning environment that they learn best in. Do they really need high contact with their teachers, or can they kind of hear something and then go off on their own to get it done and learn what they need to know? Are they looking for a really collaborative environment where they can work in groups with other students? How's the competition at the school? Some students really do thrive in competition, in a competitive environment, while other students may just kind of like shrink in that environment. So these are all things to kind of consider. We talked a little bit about the experiential learning, like co-ops and and internships, grad school admission rates, graduation rates. Graduation rates are kind of important. If the school that your child is looking to go to has a 40% graduation rate, we might want to dig in on that a little bit to see what's going on. Social opportunities are a huge consideration as well. I guess some might argue that students think these are more important than the academic opportunities sometimes. I think right now, just in general, there's a trend towards students really applying to these big schools, like giant colleges with 20 to 30,000 people, and that is great for the student who can thrive there. But we always are encouraging students to not rule out a smaller school because they think it's boring. Small schools are not necessarily boring, and so social opportunities that they are looking for exist at all kinds of places. And so that's really what we're encouraging them to do, is to kind of explore the range of schools out there. Financial considerations, things like, does the school give out any merit scholarships? How do I access them? What is my potential student loan burden going to be? Schools are becoming a little more transparent about this. Like, there are some schools here in the Boston area that are really clear, like, we don't give out merit scholarships. We'd have to give we'd have to give them to everyone. So that might be important for you to know, because those merit scholarships are really the best way to get that free money to be able to afford college. So looking into that structure, or what is the return on investment, that tends to be important to some students. So just asking those kinds of questions. And then this last bullet really is kind of for the parents, examining kind of your own personal beliefs about what college is. And this is where you can be really, really helpful. I think that it's really important to not confuse prestige with the quality of an education or what a good college is. It's really important. I know that we talk about this as a department about watching our language around certain schools, like what's a good school. There are tons of good schools out there, so many, and we haven't even heard of all of them. And living and growing up in New England is both a blessing and a curse, because we have so many colleges here. And yes, many of them do appear in the rankings. And so that kind of becomes a touchstone for students and families. But there are tons of good colleges out there. And I would just really encourage you to think about how you're using that word when you put it next to a college, because really a good college is one where your student's going to thrive and grow and find academic success and social success and be really, really happy. It does nobody any good to, get into a prestigious school where they're miserable every day. So that's the kind of stuff that we're talking to them about. This next part, if you take nothing else away, please encourage your students to really think about and look at the college recommendations that their guidance counselors are going to make for them during these individual meetings. Nothing goes on these lists by chance. There's nothing random about the list that a student's guidance counselor makes for them. We listen to the student, we ask them what they want. It's a well thought out list. It doesn't happen in the moment. And this is a really, really experienced department. I haven't been here that long. And so I still feel like I can put that out there as somebody who's kind of new. The experience in this department is deep. And every student's going to get a list of colleges. So know that and ask them about it and take a look at what's on there. And then just lastly, I just wanted to share one of my favorite books here. It's called College Match. It's by Stephen Antonoff. I love this book. This really talks to finding the ideal fit for your students. And it's really for students, so you should get it for your students. Okay. Okay, on this next slide, we have a bit about the academic fit. This is pretty known, I think, by most people. There are 4 categories of schools, and we will, when we help your student build that list, this is how we're going to categorize them. So we have the safety or likely schools. These are the schools, I like to call these the merit scholarship schools. The students' GPA and test scores, if they are using them, are slightly above what the typically admitted freshman is showing in the last admitted class. The target schools, these are where GPA and test scores, if you're using them, these are a match. Everything's falling within the middle 50%. We would call that a target. And a reach school is just the inverse of a safety or likely. It's where the student's GPA and SAT scores, if they're using them, are slightly below the admissions averages for the college's most recent freshman class. So I think those terms like slightly above and slightly below end up being a kind of important, because on the safety side of things, you don't want students to be so far above an admitted freshman profile that they might not be academically challenged enough while they're there. Yes, they might get a full scholarship, but you also want them to be academically challenged. And for a reach school, GPA and test scores are slightly below, but not too far below. And then there's the lottery category. This is kind of a newer term when talking about college lists. This is when a GPA or test scores would be really, really below the typically admitted freshmen, or if a college has an admission rate of 10 to 15% or lower, we have to put that school in the lottery category for a student. I mean, some of these schools have admissions rates at this point of 4 or 5%. And while we think that many of our students could keep up with no problem academically and socially at a lot of these schools, the statistics, the admission statistics, just make that really hard to predict admission. And you know, we don't want too many of those schools on a list. So ideally, we've got maybe 1 or 2 lottery schools if you know, a student really feels strongly about that, 1 or 2 reach, you know, maybe 2 or 3 safety, and the rest of them in the target zone. What we want every student to have as they come out of this process is a bunch of yeses and plenty of options where they would be happy. So I always know a student has done a really good job of putting together a meaningful, thoughtful college list if, when I ask them, what's your first choice, they say, you know, it really doesn't matter, I'd be happy at any of these schools. That's how I know a student they just got it. And yeah, that's what we want for every student. So we've kind of already covered this a little bit. Dave covered this a little bit by taking away the testing piece of the pie and talking about everything else that was going to be the focus of the application then. So the transcript is and always has been the most important part of the application, academic record. This is really the most accurate predictor of success in college. And so they do look at things like GPA and the strength of a student's schedule. They look at something called a school profile, which is what Franklin High School offers, and in comparison to what your student kind of took as they went through their 4 years here. Test scores, we'll cover that. Extracurricular activities and leadership roles. These are important in that they give the college an idea of kind of what, besides school, what gets a student up out of bed in the morning. What are they interested in? What do they like? What you know, what are they passionate about? It just, you know, and this can be anything. These can be school related activities or not. I mean, not all students want to be involved in sports or school-based clubs. They might do their own thing. You know, they might have like a really intense love of like gardening or beekeeping, and they might spend hours a week doing that. And that goes on the college application. If somebody has family responsibilities, you know, that absolutely could be considered a leadership role within the family. That goes on there. You know, anything that a student does outside of the classroom is worthy of the college application. So we make sure that that gets on there. In terms of just being juniors in high school, I would say at this point, a lot of students ask me this question, like, should I do more activities? And I think that at this point in a student's kind of high school career, adding on more things to do isn't necessarily the answer. It's not necessarily helpful, but taking on more responsibility in the things that they are currently doing can be helpful. So just a piece of advice there as your student is going to be thinking about probably soon how they're going to use their summer. And so that there might be something there to kind of go a little bit deeper into something they're already doing. The college essay, we do have the workshop in the summer. That can be really helpful. I think it's the most time consuming and probably stress inducing piece of the college application, really. So getting a solid draft done before the end of the summer can be really, really helpful. The college essay is important, but we don't want to give it more power than it actually has. And so the easiest way to understand the essay is hearing something that an admissions counselor said to me once. I just want to see a story written by a 17-year-old about a 17-year-old that sounds like a 17-year-old. So they're not expecting perfection, but just a really authentic voice. And we won't get into the ChatGPT AI thing here, but for sure, colleges know when this is happening. So just caution your students against that. It's very easy to just throw that into Google and figure that out. So special talents can be important: music, sports, art. You know, There are colleges that even if you're not going to major in art, they do allow you to submit a portfolio. So if your student has a special talent in a visual performing art, just know that there is a way to share that with the college. Letters of recommendation, we kind of touched on that a little bit. Jody mentioned that at the beginning of the presentation. And then the last piece is this demonstrated interest and engagement. And I think we probably need to start thinking about moving that up on the hierarchy of what's important. This is really important to a lot of schools these days. And so any school that your student is considering is not too early to start engaging. The easiest thing to do, just open every email that the school sends, click on some links, follow social media. We'll talk about going for tours in a second, but that engagement piece has become increasingly more important as colleges try to get their numbers straight before students go home for the summer. So. All right, visiting colleges. This is all coming up. In fact, a few of you may have already been out on some college visits. February and April breaks. These are great times to go and see a school. I guess maybe February might be better if you're going to a warmer climate. April, campuses around here in the Northeast can be really pretty. Things are starting to kind of come to life. Some colleges will have open houses for juniors in the spring. More and more colleges are offering tours during the weekend. So it is important that, you know, at some point you get out there to see the campus of any school that a student is really seriously considering attending. So we do provide for excused absences for college visits. So it's 6 total between junior and senior year. All a student needs to do is bring back documentation that they were on a tour. So they usually have that right there at the admissions desk when you check in. You always want to sign up for a tour. Don't show up thinking that they'll just be able to take you, especially on a school vacation week. These tours get really, really full. So you do want to make sure that you're signing up and registering through the website. Open houses versus tours. You know, an open house is usually a full day, maybe a weekend event. You get to see really every aspect of a school. A tour and information session is going to be probably about 90 minutes, maybe total, maybe a little bit longer. You know, during an open house, they'll have faculty there. You might be able to sit in on some classes. You might be able to use the gym, eat in the cafeteria, that sort of stuff. So I guess we'll move on to the next slide here. And then just making the most of your time on a campus tour. You know, obviously I already said you want to register online in advance for sure. Do a little research before you get there, so you're not asking questions that, you know, would have been easily kind of figured out prior to that. If you've got any major specific questions, you know, there's usually somebody available after the tour to answer these for you. So don't be afraid to kind of put together a list of specific questions if you've got them. And then many schools actually offer interviews, not all of them, but many schools do. And so that usually would happen after the applications go in, right around now. But just know that that is an option for students. And then if you've got the time, just poke around. What is off campus? You know, what's this neighborhood like? What do students do when they want to leave campus? As exciting as it may be as a freshman or sophomore, by the time you're a junior, you're probably going to want to get off that campus every now and again. And so it's always helpful, I think, to explore the neighborhood around it, and see what the region offers, I guess, and things like safety and all of that. So. And I think the further we get from the pandemic, I think some schools I've noticed have taken away some virtual opportunities to visit, at least in a live format. Of a site like UVisit does have lots of virtual tours, not the information session, but the tour. But if if a school is far away, definitely feel free to book a virtual visit. But if it's around here, I think in person is always helpful, because nothing can replace putting your feet, on the campus and really getting a feel for the place. And just feel free to ask students random questions as you're walking past them. college students love to talk about their experiences at their school. They're often really proud and they're brutally honest. So if you are looking for some information, they will tell you it. And then you can always engage with the admissions counselor who reads for this high school in one-on-one meetings. I see this on websites a lot now. So, book a 15-minute meeting with me. That's always helpful. If your student's really charismatic and not afraid to talk to adults, that could work out great for them. So, and I think that might be my last, no, college fairs. We have two big ones in the area. They are in Providence and Boston, the National College Fair. Those are through the National Association for College Admissions Counseling. And then there are virtual college fairs. To be honest, I have not been to a virtual college fair. I'm not exactly quite sure how it works, but I do know they usually require you to register in advance. So these are good options too. The ones in Providence and Boston are usually very, very large. And just a good opportunity to kind of, I don't know, hear about all the great unknown hidden gems out there. And I think that's it. Yeah, so Joanna's gonna finish us up.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending tonight. I promise my slides will be hopefully informative, but also just with the sake of time, more brief. I know you probably have things that you need to get back to. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Naviance. So Naviance is a college and career platform that we use here at Franklin High School. This tool allows for students to explore information surrounding the areas of study, student life, and admissions for the particular colleges that they're interested in. Starting in late January, early February, we'll start meeting with our juniors and they'll learn how to navigate Naviance, and we'll help walk them through different components during our individual meetings. We definitely encourage parents to work alongside their students to help them with the college process, but also like to highlight that this is a student managed process and that students should have ownership over it, but that any support that we can provide as they go through this process, we are happy to. So on this next slide, this is a screenshot of a sample student account and shows what your child will see when they log in to Naviance. The home screen has various tabs allowing for students to explore different colleges, careers, and surveys. And all students have a Naviance account, but some might need their account reset. So if they have any problems signing in, they can absolutely reach out to their guidance counselor and we can help them. Naviance offers many resources, one being the career interest profiler, which Ms. Walsh had mentioned earlier. And that can be found under the self-discovery tab. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you a snapshot of how the career interest profiler works. So under the self-discovery tab, when students click that, they'll come up to where it says start assessment. And so this was a guided activity that students engaged in during their sophomore meetings last year. Certainly their interests may have changed between now and then. So if they are interested in retaking the survey, they can absolutely reach out to their guidance counselor and we can reset it for them. But this tool is great because it allows for students to explore what their preferences might be and also what careers might align with those interests. So students are asked 60 questions and it takes them about 10 or so minutes to complete it. Students will respond with their level of interest, and we ask that your child, if they haven't filled out the survey yet, to please fill it out, just because it is a really helpful survey. And again, if they want to retake it, they absolutely can. But we think that this is just a really helpful way for students to learn a little bit more about themselves and maybe even explore careers that they didn't even know existed. So for reference, this next slide shows an example of a question that might be asked. So students will share how much a statement is like them, develop a way to better predict the weather. Students can determine whether this is something that they might find interesting. Maybe they like to problem solve. And so thinking about a way to predict the weather seems fun to them. So maybe they strongly agree with this, or maybe they strongly disagree. And so they get to put in their own preference based on the statement that's shared on the screen. We recommend that students, when they take the survey, sometimes stay away from that neutral one, just because sometimes it doesn't give the most accurate data. But of course, some questions they might have, they might just be indifferent to. And so for that reason, neutral might make sense. But for the most part, we try to have them do agree or disagree in terms of where they fall. So I'm now going to move, oh no, you're right. I'm now going to move over to the college tabs. So on the Naviance homepage, students will see the colleges tab. And when they click on colleges, I've highlighted the four components that I'm going to talk about tonight, just as it pertains to juniors. So under colleges, that's where they'll find letters of recommendation, colleges I'm thinking about, the Supermatch college search, and scattergrams. So these four key components are things that we're going to also talk about with our juniors when we meet with them, but I wanted to kind of give you a little overview of what each one of them looked like and how they can be informative for students. So on this side, this is where students will request their teacher letter. So they'll hit add request and they'll be able to scroll down, choose the teacher that they've requested a letter from. So when we've kind of talked a little bit about teacher letters, but we ask students to ask 1 to 2 teachers for a letter of recommendation after they return from April break. Once a student has asked a teacher or teachers to write them a letter of recommendation, they will then request them in Naviance. And this is an important step because guidance counselors will send out the teacher letters of recommendation to the schools directly through Naviance. So when guidance counselors meet with their juniors, we'll help walk them through how they'll go about this process. But of course, if they have any problems or have any questions, we are here to help. But this is just a snapshot of what it will look like when your student goes in to request a letter of recommendation. On the next slide, the colleges I'm thinking about is where students will be able to keep a list of colleges that they are most curious about. They might not end up applying to these schools, and that's completely okay, but it's just a spot in Naviance that they can keep a list, and as they begin to search and do more research, maybe they'll add some, maybe they'll take some out. So I have a sample list up here, and so this student was looking at Bryant, UNH, URI, and Sacred Heart. And what's nice is that in Naviance, it will let you know whether or not the school is in the Common App. So under delivery type, if it has a CA, that means the school is in the Common App, so the student can apply directly through the Common App. If it's a school that's not in the Common App, I know Endicott's an example, they would apply through the website. But so this is just a really nice tool in a way for students to kind of track the colleges that maybe they visited, or the colleges that they might want to visit, or colleges that they've heard of, but that they haven't had much time to research yet. This is just a nice document to keep going as they begin to do their research. And then another great feature in Naviance is the Supermatch college search. So this search criteria allows for students to search schools based on their preferences. So students may add in what they want to study. Maybe that's business, maybe that's art. They might want to say whether or not they want to play a specific sport, the location they want to be in, the size of the school they hope to attend, and then colleges will actually be generated for them based on the search criteria that they put in. So after a student puts in their search criteria, this next slide kind of shows the scores of best fit for the students. So the fit score is based on the search criteria. So this doesn't mean that the student has a 100% chance of getting in. It just means that based on what they're looking for, this school is a 100% match. So based on like their GPA and their interest, and if they want to play a sport, students can then see a list of schools that might make sense for them to look at. And it's a really helpful tool just in case students haven't heard of a school, they can then click on the school, learn more about it. And so I even find it really helpful when I'm working with my students, and we kind of look through and we see what types of schools they might match with, just because there's some schools on there that you might not even realize have certain components to them that aren't necessarily advertised on the website. So that's a really awesome tool, and we highly recommend students use that. And then moving over to the scattergrams. So scattergram is a really useful way for students to see trends. We encourage students to use the scattergrams, but to also recognize that sometimes the scattergrams might be not accurate, but like it's self-reported data. So if a student accidentally put in if they misreported something, it might come in as like an outlier, and that's something that just helps with trends. So because we ask students to fill out a survey, whether or not they got accepted or not, sometimes there can be some outliers. And so sometimes that could be because a student had legacy or they got in for a certain type of sport. But for the most part, the scattergrams kind of just help to show some trends. So in order for students to find this, they'll click on the name of the college and they'll go to the admissions tab. And this is helpful for students to determine whether a school is a safety, a target, or a reach. Many students from Franklin High School apply to UMass Amherst, so I just put UMass Amherst up here as an example. Some schools will have more data, some schools might not have as much data, and it's just dependent on how many students from Franklin have applied. But so from the data on the scattergram, students can see the average SAT score, the average ACT score. There's also a component in there, a box that you can click if you want to see who applied test optional. So I put a little arrow on the screen to show where that is. And so just if students are curious to see what the trends are with students that have applied test optional at Franklin High School, that can be a great tool. But yeah, so it's possible that, you know, there's going to be some outliers and that there might not be some data or some like, there might not be a vast majority of data for some schools, but that being said, like there's data on the websites. This might just be for Franklin High School that we just don't have as much data as that we might have for UMass Amherst for the other schools that they're looking at. And then I wanted to also show a bar graph because I find that this can also be a really helpful tool for students. This allows students to see how many students have applied to that school in that year, how many were accepted, and then how many decided to enroll. So again, this is another great way for students to kind of see trends as they begin to think about where they might want to apply, what might be a safety, what might be a target, and what might be a reach. So this is based on Franklin High School's application history. And so you can see from 2023, 218 students applied, 119 were accepted, and then 35 decided to go. And then my last slide. So we wanted to highlight the About Me section in Naviance. So in the top right corner, students will click on the About Me, then surveys from your school, which will then bring them to their junior questionnaire. We ask our students to fill out this junior questionnaire at the end of their junior year, as it helps guidance counselors write their letters of recommendation, as well as our meetings with our students. But it's a really nice way for us to hear a little bit about how our students would describe themselves. They'll list five words that come to mind when they just, maybe they'll say like hardworking, patient, you know, artistic. And so sometimes that can be really nice for us when we're thinking about their letters, kind of getting a caption snapshot of like how they would best describe themselves, as well as they can talk about academic and personal growth they've had throughout high school, clubs and activities that they participated in, and any other questions that might pertain to them that they want to make sure are highlighted in their letter of recommendation. And so if your child has any questions, please encourage them to reach out to their guidance counselor, because we are here to help and we are wanting to support them through every step of this, because it's a lot and we're here to help them. But I will now pass it over to Mrs. McVeigh for some closing remarks, but thank you so much for your time tonight. Oh, I think you might be muted.
Thank you. I am, yes. What I said is thank you very much. So to wrap up tonight, I just wanted to make mention of some things, some things to do in future meetings. Joanna mentioned the student junior questionnaire. We also will have a parent brag sheet. I think it's actually on our website now, and there's some directions there on how to access it, but it's another opportunity for you to brag about your child. We find students are often modest in their responses to the questionnaire, so this is your opportunity to give us some information that really shed some light on perhaps why you're proud of them or some things that they have done that maybe we don't know about, so we can put that in their letter. Next fall, we will have a continuation of tonight's evening where we really focus on the college application process and get into some nitty-gritty details about the Common App. We'll talk more about the financial aid process as well. MIFA is a wonderful resource here in Massachusetts that offers really a lot of webinars, but we find that their financial aid webinars are really useful for parents. I would caution you about getting into too much detail or learning too much about it this year. The information is changing. Right now, the FAFSA, which is the federal aid, isn't even available to current seniors until the end of this month. So we really focus on that financial aid process next fall with you when your children are seniors. When I do share this PowerPoint, there is a link there for any questions. Please feel free to fill that out. We will duly go over that and look to see what trends and questions there are. And we will put out a frequently asked question document next week as well. I would ask that if you have individual questions that you refrain from filling that out and emailing your child's guidance counselor instead. And let's see. I just wanted to, on a personal note, say that as you all are speaking, you know, I've done this, as Dave has done this, and many of us have for well over 20 years. And I appreciate Leanne's comment about I think you said the experience is deep in this department. This year was the very first time that I have listened to you all as a parent of a junior. So while I've presented this information for 20 plus years, it's very different presenting and then listening to it as a parent. So I'm both humbled and impressed with your knowledge. And I hope the parents recognize out there that it's a really great department, and please rely on us for any questions you have. You are not alone in this. And please, we encourage you to reach out at any time. So again, thank you for joining us tonight, and have a great holiday season, and please be in touch.